I'd like to start my presentation with a framework metaphor written by the Spanish poet Antonio Machado. Pathfinder, there is no path. You make the path by walking. By walking, you make the path. Caminante no hay camino. Se hace camino al andar se hace camino. Pathfinder, there is no path. You make the path by walking. By walking, you make the path. In pre-pandemic days, I am told that if you were to walk into a crowded bar in Madrid and loudly proclaim the first line of that poem, Caminante no hay camino, you would be greeted enthusiastically by people in the bar completing the poem, after which you would be given a free glass of wine, and a fine time would be had by all. I've never been in Madrid, so I don't know if that story is true. But I do know that the poem's wisdom illuminates the heart of what I want to say today. But the power of its metaphor is not just the physical act of walking a path. It is fully realized only in the wider context of the spiritual and emotional journeys that we all undertake, whatever physical limitations we may face. Pathfinder, there is no path. You make the path by walking. By walking, you make the path. So let's talk about grace, gravity, and getting old, which is another way of saying, let's talk about the journey of life in the autumn years. And as Machado alludes to, no matter how many people have made that journey before us, and no matter how much insight we can glean from their wisdom, each of us is ultimately experiencing that journey alone for the first and only time. We're making it up as we go along, and we know in advance that we don't make it out alive. My title, Grace, Gravity, and Getting Old, comes from the Quaker teacher and philosopher Parker J. Palmer. It is the subtitle of his 2018 book, On the Brink of Everything, Grace, Gravity, and Getting Old. And I hope you can see the cover. Might be disappearing. Books about spirituality, teaching, and leading a life of integrity. His most popular book, The Courage to Teach, was my introduction to him in the late 1990s. One of my peak experiences was spending a 5-day retreat with him in rural Pennsylvania. I still get goosebumps when recalling the humanity, wisdom, and impish delight that Parker brought to our small band of teachers. Parker turned 80 in February 2019. To honor this milestone, he wrote the book that inspired this presentation. It's a meditation on living, aging, and trying to make sense of things. I devoured it within days of its publication in July 2018 and wrote about it in my blog. Lynn read the blog post and contacted me to see if I wanted to speak about grace, gravity, and getting old at St. Andrews. I readily agreed, but said that I wanted time to let the book's themes percolate through my mind before writing about them. So most of this presentation was actually written in February 2019 in a small cabin in Tasmania's Huon Valley, where Bill and I spent 5 glorious weeks, Bill quilting and bebopping, me writing and photographing. That's Tasmania behind me, by the way, in the Huon Valley. When I started writing, I realized that Parker's book was only the starting point for a wider meditation on my own aging process, my frustrations at the way elders are marginalized in our culture, and my thoughts on how we can shake things up a bit. While most of what I'm saying today was inspired by dear Parker's book, many of the ideas don't actually appear in it. If you don't like the ideas, come see me, not Parker Palmer. And yes, there will be a call to action at the end. Let's take the 3 elements of the title in reverse order, starting off with getting old. I'm 73 years old. My husband likes to say I'm the oldest man he's ever slept with. He's 69. Now I'm learning that in this aging game, there are hierarchies. When I hear 40-year-olds complain about getting old, I roll my eyes and wish I had their knees. When I told my 99-year-old Aunt Jayne about the topic, she roared with laughter and said, "Aging? What do you know about aging? You're just a baby." So whatever I say today will no doubt provoke eye rolling from both youngers and elders alike. But here goes anyway. Yes, at 73, I know my body is aging and changing. My right knee does not always cooperate. My lower back complains when I've stood for too long or sat for too long. My eyesight is not as sharp as it once was. My reaction times have slowed. My muscle strength is diminished. My digestive tract is not always reliable. My memory for names, never great in my younger days, now requires more scaffolding. Getting in and out of a low-slung car is no longer graceful. Getting in and out of any car is no longer graceful. My hair, what remains of it, can't support the glorious permed curls of my 30s. I wear sensible shoes with sensible orthotics. And each year, I'm discovering hitherto unknown sections of the drugstore in search of ointments and assistive devices. I'm not alone in this process, and I make no claims to uniqueness. But my experience of that process is distinctly and powerfully my own. Now, having listed what I call my gaps, the general aches and pains, I can also happily report that my iPhone tells me I walked 1,988 kilometers last year, averaging more than 8,600 steps a day. I have my own teeth, can handle the 15-hour Air Canada flight from Sydney to Vancouver, read voraciously, play a mean game of Scrabble, laugh uproariously at the slightest provocation, enjoy fart jokes with grandchildren, and generally live life to its fullest, while counting my blessings at each and every turn. I have taken to heart the wise words of my dear late Quaker friend, Muriel Bishop, who in her mid-80s encouraged me to always honor my diminishments. Let me repeat that. She encouraged me to always honor my diminishments. She cautioned me to never see my body as the enemy that is somehow letting me down or betraying me. Instead, she lovingly observed her own body, calmly noticed its changes, and then got on with whatever adaptations were necessary for staying engaged with the world. Now that sounds like pretty good philosophy to me. With that in mind, let's move on to gravity. Gravity is one of those words that leads a double life. On the one hand, it is what young Isaac Newton discovered when that infamous English apple supposedly fell on his head while he was in isolation from the plague in the mid-17th century. Gravity pulls stuff down. It's the natural phenomenon that keeps us glued to the surface of this planet so we don't go flinging off into outer space. And it surely has an effect on our bodies. Think of all those bellies, bottoms, and bosoms that migrate south with the help of gravity over the years. I'm not being judgmental about my body or anybody else's body. I'm simply looking in the mirror. And consider how much damage gravity can cause your body when you find yourself tripping, slipping, or falling. And finally, think how quickly gravity asserts itself when, perhaps unwisely, you try climbing up the 1,776 steps of the CN Tower. So it is quite legitimate to talk about the literal effects of gravity when discussing aging. But the more interesting side of gravity is its metaphysical aspect. It's gravitas, which is the Latin root for gravity. It is the wisdom that comes with age and experience. the insights that give elders longer perspectives on life's challenges, the cumulative effects of an engaged life that instinctively knows everything old is new again, the sense of being grounded, adaptable, and perceptive. This, for me, is the Promethean aspect of gravity. Recall the ancient Greek legend of Prometheus, the Titan whose very name means forethought, who created humans from clay, who stole the immortal fire from Zeus, and who then gave that fire to humanity for its use. Prometheus is known for his complexity, his rebellious creativity, and his innovation. He suffered grievously for disobeying Zeus, but he stands as a symbol of the power, potential, and heartbreak of being human. He is a figure of gravity and represents the wisdom of lived experience. And so when I talk about gravity, I'm talking about the individual and collective experience of elders. I mourn the fact that this collective wisdom gets marginalized and dismissed. Unlike many indigenous cultures where elders are venerated and their wisdom is sought out, we live in a culture where elders are seen as a burden, a cost, and an inconvenience. Too often, elders are simply put into storage and forgotten, or even worse, allowed to die alone. Witness the horrors of COVID-19 and potential. But having said that, I believe that elders must also earn the respect of youngers. They can't just sit back and expect veneration and privilege to come their way. They have to demonstrate that their wisdom isn't merely a copy and paste of the past, but is a living, breathing, adaptable wisdom that is willing to take risks. That way, elders will earn their way into the dynamic conversations of the day without being dismissed as stodgy agents of the past. In other words, elders need to recast the metaphor of gravity from that which weighs us down to that which holds us together. Which brings me to grace, the last and most important element of this presentation. Grace is an elegant word that can be devilishly hard to define. Interestingly, despite having used the word in the subtitle of his book, Parker doesn't fully explain what he means by the word. In theology schools, there are entire academic departments dedicated to defining it and fighting turf wars over it. The Roman Catholic understanding of grace is very different from the Protestant understanding, and I won't take you down that slippery, angel-strewn path. Now, I am not a theologian. A theological enthusiast and a biblical dabbler, yes, but a theologian, no. But here's my definition of grace, the one I'm operating from in this presentation. Grace is the gentle, powerful fusion of kindness, compassion, forgiveness, and love. I repeat, grace is the gentle, powerful fusion of kindness, compassion, forgiveness, and love. It is all that is lovely in life. For those with the gift of faith in God, grace is reaching out from that of God within themselves to that of God in others. It becomes the ultimate form of mutuality, understanding, and empathy. The theologian Serene Jones says that, quote, grace is free. We don't earn it, nor are we required to deserve it. That's what makes grace, grace. It comes unbidden to us all. I repeat, grace is free. We don't earn it, nor are we required to deserve it. That's what makes grace, grace. It comes unbidden to us all. Now, the genius of grace, however, is that it does not need a belief in the traditional concepts of God to be a powerful force in our shared humanity. Its very decency and integrity stand on their own as guideposts for our journeys. Now, my personal understanding of grace is grounded in the belief that God acts within me and through me, and within others and through others. But I'm not claiming any exclusivity to the power of grace because of that belief. So, grace, kindness, compassion, forgiveness, and love. When I first made this presentation a year ago, I said that grace was kindness, compassion, and love. And in that time, I've learned that I needed to add forgiveness, which is another story. So, kindness, compassion, forgiveness, love. I'd like to tell you about some of the thinkers and poets who have helped shape and challenge my understanding of grace, especially as it relates to the aging process. Let me first talk about what makes us happy, because the case I'm making is that when we treat ourselves with grace, we're able to extend that grace to the way we treat others. And to treat ourselves with grace, I believe we must have a strong sense of ourselves as being deserving of that grace. Being deserving of that grace implies a sense of self-acceptance and personal happiness with who we are as people. In other words, when we are happy with who we are, and I don't mean giddy, silly happy here, but deeply, self-respectfully, appreciatively happy, that's when we can treat others in that same deeply respectful, appreciative way. The American clinical psychologist Mary Pipher wrote a moving essay in the New York Times on January 13th, 2019, entitled "The Joy of Being a Woman in Her 70s," which I highly commend. In her essay, Piper talks about gratitude not being a virtue, but a survival skill. As she says, quote, "Our capacity for gratitude grows with our suffering. That is why it is the least privileged, not the most, who excel in appreciating the smallest of things," unquote. She maintains that our happiness is built by an attitude of gratitude, coupled with a deep sense of intention. Attitude is not everything, she says, but it is almost everything. Piper once interviewed the great jazz pianist Jayne Jarvis, not long before Jarvis's death in 2010 at the age of 94. She simply asked Jarvis if she were happy. Jarvis quickly replied, quote, "I have everything I need to be happy right between my ears," unquote. I repeat, I have everything I need to be happy right between my ears. Wisdom for the ages indeed. Piper follows up with an anecdote about her Aunt Grace, who lived in the Ozarks. Piper also asked her if she were happy. Aunt Grace's reply, "I get what I want, but I know what to want. I get what I want, but I know what to want." It seems to me that these three powerful women, Mary Pipher, Jayne Jarvis, Aunt Grace, offer us much wisdom about the path to personal happiness and grace. Parker Palmer himself writes in his book about the importance of attitude. He says that he wants to collaborate with his body and his mind during the aging process. He has no interest in defying the process, but wants to work with it. One of his suggestions is to do this, quote, "Every day, exercise your heart by taking in life's pains and joys. That kind of exercise will make your heart supple. so that when it breaks, which it surely will, it will break not into a fragment grenade, but into a greater capacity for love. If you hold a healthy awareness of your own mortality, your eyes will be opened to the glory and grandeur of life. Unquote. Parker sums up the importance of attitude in creating the kind of self-acceptance and happiness that leads to grace when he quotes the late wondrous American poet Mary Oliver, who simply says, quote, "I instruct myself over and over in joy." I instruct myself over and over in joy. I'll finish my thoughts on grace by talking about the English poet David Whyte. His thoughts on creating powerful attitudes can teach us so many good and wonderful things about happiness and grace. Here's what he said in an interview in December 2018 with Krista Tippett in the On Being podcast, a podcast I highly commend for its weekly infusion of spiritual nourishment. Quote, "The only choice we have as we mature is how we inhabit our vulnerability, how we become larger and more courageous and more compassionate through our intimacy with disappearance. Our choice is to either inhabit vulnerability as generous citizens of loss, robustly and fully, or conversely, as misers and complainers." Unquote. Let me repeat that. The only choice we have as we mature is how we inhabit our vulnerability, how we become larger and more courageous and more compassionate through our intimacy with disappearance. Our choice is to either inhabit vulnerability as generous citizens of loss, robustly and fully, or conversely, as misers and complainers. Unquote. I find Whyte's conception of inhabiting our vulnerability to be a powerful agent of grace, a recognition that we must start off by dealing with ourselves gracefully. How can we respond to others in grace if we're not nurturing ourselves with that same grace? I repeat, how can we respond to others in grace if we're not nurturing ourselves with that same grace? And then there's Whyte's recognition that life comes with loss. As we age, we do indeed become intimate with disappearance. How we respond to the disappearances in our lives, however, becomes crucial to our journeys. Do we respond with complaints and negativity, or do we respond with generosity and courage? So at the same time, Whyte understands the physical and emotional realities of our aging selves, while also challenging us to respond to that process with courage and generosity, both with ourselves and with others. But Whyte takes the aging process beyond mere acknowledgement and forbearance to a whole new level. Let me quote him again from the same On Being interview. Quote, "There's a form of youthfulness you're supposed to inhabit when you're in your 70s, 80s, or 90s. It's the sense of imminent surprise, imminent revelation, the shape of your own absence." I repeat, there's a form of youthfulness you're supposed to inhabit when you're in your 70s, 80s, or 90s. It's the sense of imminent surprise, imminent revelation, the shape of your own absence. Unquote. He then adds, quoting from his poem, "Everything is Waiting for You," quote, "It's astonishing how much time human beings spend away from their frontiers. The doors have always been there to frighten you and invite you. It's astonishing how much time human beings spend away from their frontiers. The doors have always been there to frighten you and invite you. So he's encouraging us to reframe aging as a time of learning, discovery, and delight, of pushing ourselves through new doorways and exploring evolving understandings of our presence on this planet and beyond. My friend Muriel Bishop, the one who gently encouraged me to honor my diminishments, would have had a deep appreciation for what White is saying. I can only imagine the remarkable conversations that David White and Muriel Bishop might have had, two deep, loving, questing souls. Now, in all this talk about courage, grace, and transformation, I also need to touch on fears. Whenever I start a major new project, I buy a journal for recording thoughts, ideas, and quotations. Here's the one that I bought for Grace, Gravity, and Getting Old. And on the first page is a post-it note that simply says, fears. It's the first note that I made. I'm told that the phrase, do not be afraid, appears in the Bible 366 times. Well, easy for the Bible to say. I never say to anyone, don't be afraid. If you're afraid, you're afraid. It's like saying to someone, don't be sad, don't be angry, don't be upset. If I'm feeling afraid, sad, angry, or upset, that's what I'm feeling. And no amount of well-intentioned do-goodery from friends, family, or professionals will change the fact of what I'm feeling, especially when it's coupled with that rarely helpful advice to just get over it, move on, or my favorite, don't be so sensitive, Larry. Fears I have in abundance, from Tasmanian tiger snakes to COVID-19, and from developing dementia to what might happen in downtown Toronto if the Leafs ever did win the Stanley Cup again. In virtually any situation, I can come up with a dozen fear-based wretched scenarios in a nanosecond. And I worry, and I fret, and I stew. My fears may appear baseless to others, but to me, they're real. But as with everything else in life, it's not the feeling or the situation or the behavior that is the issue. Crucially, it's how you choose to deal with it that makes all the difference. It's that choice, that attitude that Prometheus and Aunt Jean and Aunt Grace and Mary Piper and Parker Palmer and Jayne Jarvis and Antonio Machado and Muriel Bishop and David White and Mary Oliver and Lynn Donovan each illuminates so powerfully. The attitude that looks at a challenging or fearful situation and says, I will choose to respond in love, grace, charity, compassion, courage, and dignity. And I will make that choice both in dealing with myself and with others. I repeat, I will choose to respond in love, grace, charity, compassion, courage, and dignity. And I will make that choice both in dealing with myself and with others. And you know what? We make these choices one unique decision at a time. Inside St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, on January 26, 2019, when many of us gathered to celebrate Christy Belcourt's marvelous Wisdom of the Universe mural on the exterior wall of the church, Lynn Donovan said, referring to the thousands of painted dots in Belcourt's mural, you accomplish things one dot at a time. You accomplish things one dot at a time. So that's what I'm asking you to do, to make grace-filled decisions, one brave, self-respectful dot at a time. That is the call to action that I talked about at the beginning. I'm calling on you to choose to respond to yourself and to others with grace, courage, radical hope, and love. As the author Anne Hines says in her beautiful 2005 novel, The Spiral Garden, about a North Toronto minister who has a spectacularly public crisis of faith, quote, I think in the end, I would rather have courage than certainty. I think in the end, I would rather have courage than certainty. Let me finish by reading one of my favorite poems by Mary Oliver. It's called I Worried, and it appears in her 2010 poetry collection, Swan. I worried a lot. Will the garden grow? Will the river flow in the right direction? Will the earth turn as it was taught? If not, how shall I correct it? Was I right? Was I wrong? Will I be forgiven? Can I do better? Will I ever be able to sing? Even the sparrows can do it, and I'm, well, hopeless. Is my eyesight fading, or am I just imagining it? Am I going to get rheumatism, lockjaw, dementia? Finally, I saw that worrying had come to nothing and gave it up, and took my old body and went out into the morning and sang. And so, my friends, I encourage you to find and share the wisdom of your stories. I encourage you to find the sacred in your everyday lives and to rejoice in it. I encourage you to be fierce and courageous and outrageous. I encourage you to create your path by walking it. And I encourage you to join Mary Oliver and to go outside and sing. Thank you.